Art can be pretty strange at times. Nobody ever looked at Pablo Picasso's Weeping Woman and thought, that's a very normal painting of a human person. Despite recognizing this, there's still something intrinsically fascinating about strange images and artistic portrayals from ancient times. Today, we'll be looking at 5 ancient images that are unexplained, unexplainable, or they simply don't seem to make sense within the context of the time period. The Ubaid period was a prehistoric period of Mesopotamia running from roughly 6,000 to 7,500 years ago. It's named for Tel al-Ubaid, the location of the largest excavation of artifacts from the Ubaid period. But the strangest of those artifacts unearthed were a number of figurines. Most of the figurines were of farm animals, but the most notable were humanoid figurines referred to as the Ubaid Lizardmen.
I'm the Lizard King.
These figures depict slender, human-like creatures with snake-like heads. The heads are elongated with tapered faces, featuring incised almond-shaped eyes and small noses shaped like a lizard's. They also appear to be wearing some sort of head covering like a helmet. The majority of the figurines discovered had female characteristics, though some had been male or genderless as well. These figurines take a variety of mundane poses. They could be standing or sitting, and there is at least one figurine of a lizard woman nursing a child with the same snake-like features. Some of the figures are painted to depict what may have been clothing, jewelry, or body modifications. It's unclear what purpose these figurines served or why the people were depicted in this way, assuming they were even people. The elongated heads may represent the practice of head shaping or artificial cranial deformation. This was a practice that was common many places throughout the world, including during prehistoric times. Many ancient skulls have been found that were elongated as a result of head shaping, and there is evidence that the Ubaid culture engaged in this practice as well. But that only explains why the heads on these figurines would be elongated. It doesn't explain the other reptilian characteristics of the figures. The majority of these figures are found in houses rather than in graves, including all of the oldest examples, which seems to suggest that they were not used for ritualistic purposes. They could still have been spiritual in nature, but whether the Ubaid Lizardmen were meant to represent deities or ordinary people is unknown. Now, there are a number of different theories regarding the meaning behind these figurines, but because there are no written records from back then, everything is purely speculation. All we can say for sure is that these figurines were not depictions of serpentine aliens who visited Earth thousands of years ago. The Dendera Light is a motif found on 3 stone reliefs in the Hathor Temple in Dendera in Egypt. The image features a lotus flower, from which what appears to modernize to be a light bulb or cathode ray tube emerges. Inside the light bulb is a snake, reminiscent of a bulb filament. One figure, usually interpreted as a priest or priestess, is holding the bulb and directing it upward, while 2 smaller figures are beneath the bulb, supporting it on their heads. The stem of the flower extends towards a small pillar, appearing like an electrical plug. Mainstream historians all agree that this is a depiction of part of the Egyptian creation myth, and the similarity in appearance to modern lighting devices is just a coincidence. In one myth, the first thing to emerge from the primordial Sea of None, also referred to as the Sea of Two Knives, was a lotus flower. This explains why the flower would be present in the motif, as well as why there is a baboon holding 2 knives next to the light. The flower is then said to have given birth to Atum, the sun and creator god, who is represented in art by a serpent. Most importantly, there is even hieroglyphic text surrounding the motifs that explains all of this. There are other similar depictions of this story as well, though they are missing one key detail. The other motifs feature a snake rising vertically from a lotus flower, but the snake is not enclosed in a bulb. That extra detail, combined with how much the flower stem looks like a plug, is what makes the Dendera Light's resemblance to electric light so strange in the eyes of many modern people. Of course, while the Dendera Light is unique in depicting the creation myth in this way, later depictions of Atum do represent him as a serpent enclosed in a bubble. But even though we could explain exactly what the motif is really meant to represent, the coincidental similarity to more modern technology is too strange for many people to overlook. There's a debate to be had over whether the Sumerian king list counts as an image or not, since it was cuneiform text, but a lot of Egyptian hieroglyphs are considered strange images despite being a form of text, so we're just going to roll with it today, alright? The Sumerian king list is exactly what it sounds like. It's a chronological list of all of the kings in the important cities in the region and the lengths of their reigns. The oldest known copy of the list dates back to about 2084 BC, but it chronicles a list of kings going back thousands more years. In the time period labeled as being before the flood, the reigns of each king were listed as ranging from 18,600 to 43,200 years. This part is clearly based on myth, though the list continues onward, with the vast majority of reigns being written as lasting for hundreds of years. The majority of reigns weren't listed as being within a single human lifetime until it reached about 2300 BC, just a couple of hundred years before the earliest known list was written. However, it is widely accepted that the main purpose of the list wasn't to be a historically accurate record of all of the different kings in the area, but rather it was designed to grant legitimacy to the current rulers. There are several pieces of evidence within the text to support this theory. To start, every reign is listed as being sequential, when in reality, there were numerous times when there were kings in different cities whose reigns overlapped. The cities of Lagash and Larsa and their rulers were also omitted from the list, an omission that many believed was deliberate, as they were cities of considerable importance at the time. Most notably, there have been multiple different versions of the Sumerian king list found originating from different time periods. These different versions redact the reigns of some kings whose lineage could have called the current ruler's legitimacy into question. Because of all this, it's unclear how reliable the king list is as a historical document. For a long time, it was believed that it was an incredibly important document, and historians tried to reconstruct a history of the region by adjusting the lifespans to something a little more realistic. In recent years, however, it has been argued that the list is so inaccurate that it shouldn't be used at all. But despite all of the kings who allegedly ruled for hundreds or thousands of years each, there is one entry in the Sumerian king list that is stranger than all the others. Claims of ancient figures having unnaturally long lives are nothing particularly unique or unusual. Even the Bible is full of them. On the king list, however, the king's reigns seem to be based on round numbers. Sumerians used a sexagesimal number system, or a base 60. All of the extended reigns were multiples of 60, such as 900 or 1200 years. This indicates that they may have just been approximations of a time period using round numbers rather than an attempt to chronicle a realistic timeline. All of the extended reigns, that is, except for one. En-Tura-Ana, the fourth king of the first dynasty of Kish, was listed as ruling for 420 years, 3 months, and 3.5 days. The 420 years part makes sense, as that would just be written as the number 70 in sexagesimal. But the rest is extremely specific, and it is the only entry to count individual months and days. Why this particular reign is so specific remains a bizarre mystery. Venus figurines is the name given to a collection of over 200 figurines found throughout Europe. The name is reference to the goddess Venus, though ironically the figures predate the earliest references of Venus by thousands and sometimes even tens of thousands of years. The oldest of these figures is the Venus of Hohlefels, which was discovered in a cave near Schlesingen in Germany named Hohlefel, literally hollow rock. The Venus of Hohlefels was carved out of mammoth ivory and is dated as being between 35,000 and 42,000 years old, making it the oldest undisputed depiction of a human. There are a couple of alleged Venuses that are claimed to be 300,000 years old or older, but there's a lot of debate over whether or not they were actually carved by people. Despite being found all over Europe and Asia, even deep into Siberia, the characteristics of the Venus figurines are all the same. They are representations of nondescript women with heavily exaggerated physical characteristics. The figurines feature giant breasts, big round bottoms, and are always obese, pregnant, or both. They generally lack feet and sometimes lack arms as well. Some don't even include a head. In the case of the Venus of Hohlefels, it is believed, based on a perforated protrusion, that the lack of head may have allowed it to be worn like an amulet. But even in cases where a head does exist, they are always featureless with no face. What makes these figurines so strange isn't a question about what they are. They are clearly meant to be depictions of women with exaggerated sexual characteristics. The strange part is that they are all of similar design, despite ranging from 11,000 to 42,000 years in age and being from a wide geographical region. And that shared design features a body type that wasn't really possible at the time. These figures all date back to the last ice age, most notably to a time of falling temperatures as the ice age reached its coldest. It would be rare for obesity to arise in nomadic hunter-gatherers to begin with, but it shouldn't have been possible at all at a time when falling temperatures made food even scarcer, resulting in additional nutritional stress. So that begs the question of why the Venus figurines were carved with the proportions they had. There's no consensus, but there are a few theories. One theory is that these were fertility idols, hence the exaggerated sexual features. They could also have been seen as the ideal figure for a mother-to-be, as they could assume that an overweight woman with large breasts would be better suited for nursing and have more nutrients to spare for her child. In a similar vein, it's also been argued that they may have been depictions of a mother goddess. Another theory that has emerged more recently is that these figurines were meant to represent survival and longevity rather than fertility. Granted, fertility would be important for survival of the tribe as a whole, hence some of the Venuses are pregnant, but it is argued that they were meant to represent more of a hopeful vision of what continued survival might look like. This theory was supported by mild variations in the size of the women. Examining how cold it would have been at the time and location of each of these figurines being carved, there seems to be a correlation between lower temperatures and increased obesity in the sculptures. A final theory is that these figurines may have been female artists sculpting depictions of themselves. It is argued that the lack of facial features is because the artists were looking down at their own bodies while sculpting, so they had no way to see their own face. If this were the case, one would expect there to be a lot more variation in how exaggerated the features were and how overweight they were depicted. Oh yes, and also there's a fringe theory that this was a form of Paleolithic pornography, because why not? When we think of clothing in ancient Rome, we generally think of tunics. This was the standard clothing for men and women, and what people in ancient Roman art are generally depicted wearing. There are also gladiators and other warriors who are shown dressed wearing armor, and slaves working in the fields who may only be wearing a loincloth. But the one thing that probably doesn't come to mind when most people think of ancient Rome is a bikini. 3 kilometers from Piazza Armerina in Sicily lays the remains of the Villa Romana de Casale. It was discovered in the 1950s after a farmer found pieces of a mosaic. The villa had been partially destroyed by the Normans, but after the site was excavated, it was discovered that the mudslides that buried the villa had left many of its mosaics in a remarkable state of preservation. The massive estate had occupied 22 acres, and 3,500 square meters of that was covered with elaborate mosaics. Though the extent to which the mosaics had been preserved made them unique specimens, most of them were pretty typical of what one would expect from ancient Rome. There were depictions of hunting, ships carrying large animals like elephants, and scenes from mythology. But there was one mosaic that became famous because of how unusual it was. At first glance, this mosaic appears to look like a modern beach scene. It features a bunch of women in bikinis engaged in various activities like frisbee, beach volleyball, and even women carrying small dumbbells while jogging. What makes this mosaic seem so strange is how modern everything looks, but it's only strange to us because depictions of female athletic competition from ancient Rome are so rare. To the Romans, this would have been completely normal. To start, the clothing they're wearing is not actually bikinis. The women are shown wearing loincloths, known as sublicocula, and breastcloths, known as strophium. This was typical athletic apparel for the time, although men would only wear the loincloth, with the strophorium acting like a sports bra. These garments were frequently worn beneath tunics as well for additional comfort. As for the sports they're depicted competing in, the frisbee is naturally a discus. What ball game was being played is unknown, but games involving a ball have been popular throughout history, and it is believed that this mosaic does show some precursor to volleyball. The only thing that is really dissimilar from how it initially appears is the woman who appears to be jogging while carrying weights. While this is a popular form of exercise now, the weights in the mosaic, called halteres, were actually used by athletes performing the long jump. By swinging their arms and using the momentum provided by the weights, competitors could increase their jump distance by a few centimeters. So as strange as this ancient depiction of what looks like bikini-clad women engaging in modern activities appears to us in the modern day, in the context of ancient Rome, it's just a regular piece of artwork. At the time, this would have just been another typical sporting event in ancient Rome.